Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is MTA International USA Studios in Silver Spring, Maryland. My name is Ahmad Khan, and I will be moderating today's discussion on Islam Ahmadiyya in America. Our esteemed panelists today are Brother Al-Haj Habeeb Shafeeq of Orlando and Brother Al-Haj Yaqub of Milwaukee. Brother Al-Haj Habeeb Shafeeq served in the education industry as a social services professional, social services consultant. He acquired his master's in public administration. He worked in city government planning, special projects planning. He's a traveler. He traveled to Mecca, Medina, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Ghana, UK. He has a passion for community service and education. And in his off time, he loves to cook and garden. Brother Al-Haj Yaqub served in the military during the Vietnam era. He served as an executive management in proprietary schools, worked in the nonprofit for 10 years, quality control in the American Society of Mechanical Engineers as a code inspector. He's a writer, thinker, and a scholar. In previous episode, we discussed in length the decade of the 1930s and the prominent role of Sufi Mutir Rahman Bengali, and how he and what kind of challenges he had to face that were after the departure of Mufti Muhammad Sadiq. And he had the ability of seeking help from the trained missionary teachers that Mufti Muhammad Sadiq had left behind. And other things in this decade are highlighted that Islam was further in its propagation based on the 70 different lectures that Sufi Mr. Bengali had done, and the flow and the message was the same that Mufti Muhammad Sadiq had brought, which was of racial equality and the universal brotherhood of Islam. Today, our discussion will examine the decade of the 1940s and how Islam Ahmadiyya was progressing in this particular time frame, and what kind of challenges it had, and where did it progress. So with that discussion, let's begin. And I'm going to begin with Brother Habeeb.
Please.
How did the first convention held in Dayton, Ohio, which is your hometown, help to create the platform for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community going forward in terms of propagating its message and having an even bigger impact than before?
So after this clarion call from Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, second by Charge Muhammad Zafrullah Khan, and all the structural and systemic work done by Mufti Saab and Rahman Bengali Sahib, the natural outgrowth of that, no doubt, was now a convention where these various different cities that may have been that knew about each other, maybe talked to each other or had family or friends on the phone, they are now converging on this very interesting city in the Midwest in Dayton, Ohio.
And the first convention was in 1948.
Absolutely. 1948, this was in Dayton, Ohio, at a time where industry and jobs were booming. World War II had concluded. It was truly happy days, or here again. And so the natural culmination of the things that had been happening is now apexing to this called convention, and it began to introduce the converts into a collective structure of Jamaat Ahmadiyya.
It also provides some administrative structure that was created within the convention, secretariats.
Secretariats, and they had to begin to work with each other, and it was just a remarkable time of fellowship and a commencement. You can imagine what they must have felt like, knowing that they were going to be the first of many of these to come in the United States.
Brother Yaqub, we talked about the challenges of having a large number of converts coming in and their their maintenance of retention of the faith, plus also propagating it to newcomers. In this particular decade, it seems like we were geographically growing, so we had a multi-city presence. So if you can kind of briefly describe this particular challenge with how are we dealing with a few missionary resources?
Well, obviously, one of the major challenges were the distance between the cities. There were few missionaries and many more cities. That was one. And this was during the period what we call the Jim Crow era. So if you were dark-hued, being able to travel from one city to another, you either had to if you were a Negro, as the term was used back in those days, then you had to follow a certain route to go from city to city, and you had to have people along the way that you can either stop and spend the night, or you had to take a train. And it wasn't like it is now, where everywhere you go there were superhighways or expressways, as we call them. The other challenge that was there was a large number of the converts were from the South. And these people, when they died as Ahmadis, they left their property to the Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
It's donation from their side.
So we had amassed a lot of property, but we didn't have the
and this was
legal expertise.
And this was the devotion of these converts.
Yeah.
And they sincerely gave this property because of what they believed in.
What they believed in. So we didn't have the legal expertise. We didn't have the wherewithal. The missionaries were missionaries. They were not equipped to deal with the legalese of some city in Louisiana or in Alabama or Mississippi, where these converts came from and moved north. And so we had challenges like that.
There's some of the missionary names that can come up outside of Sufi M.R. Bengali are like Dr. Khalil Ahmad Nasser, Mirza Munawwar Ahmad, Ghulam Yassin, Shukar Elahi Hussain. These were the few missionaries that were involved in this particular decade, helping out with the community. I want to kind of talk about something that happened in the beginning of the decade, and going off of how Khilafat is continuously playing a role of guidance. In the beginning, there was the Khilafat Silver Khilafat Jubilee, which was the 50 years of the celebration of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. And there was an address by the second Khalifa, may Allah be pleased with him, in which he said that the underlying joy for celebration is to know that it has been years since it began, and the platform for Khilafat has grown stronger. What sort of impact would this have had on the uplifting of the American Ahmadi Muslims who couldn't see this man but followed his guidance wholeheartedly? So especially the recent converts. Brother Habeeb.
Yes. If we think about the verses in the earlier part of Al-Baqarah that tells us to believe in the unseen, these early converts are now seeing this unseen becoming very revealed to them, and they're feeling a part of history. And that feeling a part of history and Khilafat, it was absolutely celebratory for them. So they had a strong, strong sense that they were a part of something not only just unique, but it was divinely unique. And before their very eyes, Allah Ta'ala was revealing unseen into the scene for them.
And the aspect of the guidance of Khilafat came through the characters of the converts that were at the time of Mufti Muhammad Sadiq and still alive.
Yes.
And the good example of the missionaries at the time that they were setting a precedence. They were sacrificing, sacrificed their families. And this was being noticed by the American Ahmadi Muslims at the time. I'll give you a particular example. Haji Yaqub Saab, for instance, Mirza Munawwar Ahmad, who was overseeing the Pittsburgh area region at the time.
Yes.
And it was in 1948 when he passed away.
Yes.
He was only 32 years old.
Inna
He
Allah.
wasn't able to communicate with his mother for the time span when Pakistan and India were separating.
Yes.
So that was a sacrifice in alone. He didn't know what the outcome was. How is she okay? The other thing, obviously his family. He hadn't seen his father in a while. So I believe his father did pass away while he was in the States. So, what kind of sacrifices did missionaries in positions like Mirza Munawwar Ahmad had to go through in your knowledge for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community?
Well, what the Americans saw was this example of a man who left his home to come to a strange place and preach and practice the religion of Islam. That left, or really, it was an example that was awesome for an American to be able to see that. And it really left us in awe. And, you know, I personally myself saw a missionary who died in the mosque, and he had a family. And he wasn't able to go home and see his family and everything because his Khalifa didn't give him permission to go home.
And that was the character of
Yes,
these
sir.
missionaries,
Right.
reflecting the guidance of the Khalifa.
Exactly.
May I add something here,
Yes,
please?
Go ahead.
The world at that time was a lot bigger. And not only were these dynamic things happening in America, but something very significant was happening on the Indo-Pakistan, on the Indian subcontinent, and that was the creation of the partition. And this partition was given a great deal of strain to the people on the subcontinent, but in particular for our discussion with Ahmadis and missionaries and their families, and yet they didn't quibble, they didn't cry out, they endured this suffering, endured this quiet sacrifice to establish this wonderful new presence in the United States. It was a remarkable sacrifice.
And I also want to give you one more pertinent example of sacrifice that was of a native in the United States, an African American, Rashid Ahmed American.
Yes.
Since we're talking about sacrifices, his sacrifice was to go alone into an area which he had no knowledge of.
Or language.
Yes. To see the Khalifa that he only heard of. And he didn't know what to expect, but he sacrificed his time to go there and pursue knowledge, which he acquired in the Theological Institute of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community. So what was his contribution in terms of this community when we talk about that?
Yeah, Mr. Rashid Ahmed American we looked upon him as a person that we can respect. That he was one of our own. He came from America, went over, made that sacrifice, and when he came back here, we listened to all of the stories that he told of living there. There was even a film that was made, a 35 millimeter film we saw, where he was living in virtually a tent. And
there's a picture that I saw which was very interesting. He was making roti.
Yeah.
in his basic, simple garb,
Right.
the shalwar kameez
Right.
of the Indo-Pak region. And he was doing it like he was natural.
Yeah, exactly.
So he completely adopted that lifestyle.
He immersed himself into not only just the culture, but into the faith and into that presence of the Caliphate. And then he became a companion, as it were, of the second Khalifa, the promised son, and came back and told us these stories, and it beckoned us to want ourselves to go. I know it beckoned all of us to want to do that for different reasons and at different times.
I want to kind of go into a larger discussion of the type of effect that we were having on the American society in terms of our teachings. So this, Brother Habeeb, what kind of, did Islam and Ahmadiyya provide a solution to the societal and social ills of the American society at the time, the larger American society? And can you just kind of give some examples of what these teachings were? For instance, not to drink alcohol.
The Islam provided the solution for not just the social ills of America, but it provided the physical and moral and spiritual solution for these individuals whose message of justice and peace and inclusion attracted them in the first place. So it was not just come to Islam, we will treat you decently, but come to Islam and then traverse this journey for personal connection with your Creator.
And we can prove this because the converts that came in who were drinking or doing drugs and alcohol or other unsavory things changed their lifestyle.
And it wasn't just that. There were some good, decent people who maybe were not even doing as much as that. As the significant missing piece with our people was this connection with Allah and Caliphate. This, to me, and to what I used to hear, was one of the most significant things, because there were good, decent Christian people who don't drink, good, different people who don't use these things. But it was this additional thing that no other group can do, no other organization, and that was put you in touch with your Khalifa through Ahmadiyya, and to have this personal connection with Allah. This was the big thing.
And it was not just a moral behavior, the model of unity that we had within the community.
Interracial.
Interracial.
It's very important.
Interracial model that we had.
Yes.
That even other groups tried to emulate.
Yes.
Specifically, I'll give you an example. Haji, Brother Yaqub. And that is in 1943, there were a couple of three different groups that tried to join together, and they actually tried to create a charter. One was Daud Fassel's group, Wali Akram's from the Cleveland group, and then there was a Egyptian-led group called the Universal Arabic Association, led by Muhammad Ezzeladin. In their first year, when they tried to create the charter, they were unsuccessful, and slowly their communities faded away. Why couldn't that same model be created with them or any other community at that time that were maybe thinking about it, like the way that the Ahmadiyya Muslim community had already done for at least 2 decades now?
Right. I think the unifying factor that they did not have was a Khalifa. And unlike the Ahmadiyya movement, we were unified through the principles of Caliphate on the precepts of prophethood. So whatever that was, call it a spirit, if you will.
Yes.
Those people who accepted Jamaat Ahmadiyya also accepted the principles that support Caliphate as well. And you can join another organization, and it's just you join an organization, that's it. So I would say Caliphate is the unifying factor that holds us together.
When we started our discussion, we talked about the convention.
Correct.
And it wasn't a problem for us to create all of the administrative structures very easily, and we agreed upon it, and it was done, and it was approved.
Right.
And in this particular, from what I read, is that they started to bicker over what kind of rules and regulations they would like, and everybody had a different opinion.
Right.
So it seems like that leading role of Khilafat is the rope.
Right.
The rope of God.
Similarly to parallel to what we see today in the different parts of the world, unity is constantly called out for, and very few times is it achieved. And when it is achieved, it is not lasting, because it lacks the divine support of a Caliphate.
Brother Habeeb.
Yes.
how are the Ahmadi Muslims viewed in comparison to other Muslim groups? Did Americans have enough knowledge of Islam to make a distinction to know the difference, or were we just viewed as Muslims A, Muslims B?
One of the things that I remember is not so much that we had this startling thing in which we created that. What I think is more significant, and perhaps the better question, is that Islam began to touch the African American community in America one person at a time, and that began to proliferate. And so when you say did it affect to the point where it made the news, or it made documentaries? No, not at all. And I don't think it was supposed to. I think what it was supposed to do is exactly what it did, and that is to come to America and to reach the least of those, the most disenfranchised, and begin to beckon them to come and to stand and to unite under this universal banner of Islam. That it did. I remember constantly that that the early converts and my father and others, they always had to make this distinction between themselves, and that they, even though I remember my dad used to say, I'm black, but I'm not a black Muslim. I'm a black, but I'm not a member of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's group. So we had to, it was kind of like a first step back, and then let me tell you who I am if you want to listen.
So
if I could cite something, right in Milwaukee, where I'm from, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, right after 9/11, of course, we were members of a community, and we had personal friends that went across all racial lines. And when it was necessary for people to have an understanding of 9/11, European American contacted our community. Now, why did they do that? Because they had personal relationships with Ahmadis, and they knew that Ahmadis viewed the world differently. They may not agree.
And it also seems like the view of Islam and Ahmadiyya in America was getting to be more awareness over the decades.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, that's a good point. Yes.
The idea that the people who didn't even know anything about Islam, and they were every person was a Muslim,
Right.
began to see the distinction, and we'll kind of see that in other episodes.
Yes. And this is a seed that was growing.
Right.
And it required cultivation and nurturing and sacrifice and spiritual fertilizer. And then Haji is absolutely spot on. At 9/11, no doubt, brought into sharp focus. Okay, who do we go to? And there we were.
And we were talking about the situation of societal ills and
Yes.
and social ills. I just wanted to give you the context of what state the United States was at the time. Just brief references that I acquired. For instance, in 1945, the Christian Century, which was a prominent Christian magazine, noted that there were $7 billion that were spent on liquor, just liquor alone. That's $54 per person on liquor. And America's divorce rate at that time was an all-time high, and it actually referenced it in an article called "Our Divorce Courts Reached a Record." So everything that we were talking about,
Yes.
that provided that base. So there is that thing of understanding that we had the solutions,
Yes.
but also the factor of that they're becoming aware of who we are and
Yes.
that we do have the solutions.
Absolutely.
So it's not just us having the solutions, but they're becoming aware of us having the solutions.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the decades will discuss how things changed and there were different problems.
Yes, and I'd like to push back gently and respectfully on this notion that African Americans during this time were somehow this this big, huge group of drunkards and things. African Americans at that time, you have to recall, is that we were for the most part, we were Douglas and Lincoln Republicans. We were some of the most conservative individuals. We did not gravitate to the Democratic Party to after Roosevelt and the New Deal. So what I'm trying to say here is that Islam's message was not just one to free African Americans from social ills of drinking and gambling and other types of moral vices. Islam's appeal was universal. It was love. It was interfaith. It was this yearning to have a connection with your Creator and transcend these awful other things. And that's not to say that we didn't have some of those, but for the most part, the African American community prior to President Roosevelt and the New Deal were strict.
So it kind of answers the final question.
Conservatives.
Which is, our success wasn't dependent on the numbers of the conversions.
Yes.
It was on the quality of our message.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think we can conclude with this discussion that was the case.
Yes.
And all of the hurdles that we had,
Absolutely.
we had successes along the way.
Yes.
And I think one of the biggest pinnacles of our success was the convention itself.
Absolutely.
And it will,
yes.
it will participate or contribute into that success in
Yes.
further decades.
Yes.
So with that overview, I would like to bring your attention to information on www.alislam.org/sunrise, or you can go to www.muslimsunrise.com. Thank you for joining us. This is MTA International Studios, Silver Spring, Maryland, on Islam Ahmadiyya in America. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.